Hello, and welcome to this. This is a reaction video to how the rich keep screwing up global health by some more news. And I'm going to be going ahead and I'm going to be reacting to that video. So let's dive in, shall we say. Words are fucked.
Hi, this is the news, and welcome to it.
Oh,
Wow, look at all this news. Stonks, Dogecoin, and a pandemic, which is still... Oh, let me check.
Yeah, still coming there.
Yep, still happening. You know that whole trope where humanity finally decides on world peace when faced with an alien invasion? It would take some kind of malevolent force that targets all of humanity for us all to come together and defend our existence.
True,
well, in reality, if
really,
malevolent aliens came to invade Earth, we would spend most of our time debating their existence, while Ted Cruz retweets an I identify as the aliens headline from the Babylon Bee, and the rest of our time watching various CEOs offer automated delivery services of human brains to the aliens using DoorDash drivers who also get eaten by the aliens.
I mean, I don't know why you want to eat human brains.
This pandemic reveals how the champions of capitalism are willing to risk human extinction to make about a dozen people extremely wealthy.
More than a dozen.
Capitalist cheerleaders like to say
not
that...
always. Like, sometimes it's more than a dozen. It's not just like a dozen people. It's like, sometimes it's a few. About 2,000 in some cases. But yeah, it's a very small number of people.
The market will be able to sort out what's best for humanity through the magic of competition.
Yeah.
And
basically what'll happen is, so basically these companies that form like little groups where they interact together, basically they'll be competition to each other. A bit like how there's just the competition's so yeah, definitely that's how you solve problems.
Any little gaps left over will be filled in by charity and philanthropy.
Which is terrible,
so let's check in on one of the world's biggest philanthropists, Bill Gates. As
a proportion, I would not say so. People just say, "Oh, what do you mean as a proportion?" I'm just saying, as a proportion of my wealth, I donated like over 1% last year, or this year rather, of my net worth. So of that thing. So yeah. Actually, no. Hold on a second. No, because when I donated it, I didn't have any money. So it was after I had spent all the money that I had. So I had a little bit left over. And you know what I did? I donated all that money to charity. So yeah. I donated the remainder of my bank account to charity. Technically, it was 100%. So, yeah. Yeah.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been such a force for good in the world. Evidence that rich people really do want to solve all of the world's problems. For example, they're donating money to help increase access to COVID vaccines in low-income countries. And in April 2020, Oxford University pledged to donate the rights to its COVID vaccine to any drug maker, making it open source. This would make...
Where did that go? AstraZeneca, huh?
The vaccine recipe available to all drug makers all over the world, vital in creating enough doses to inoculate the global population at low costs and in poorer countries as well. So, yeah, we did it! Capitalism works! And worked. The rich did it. Cody's, Shody, Ovi, over. Let's pack it in. We're packing it in. We're gonna pack it in. There's another page here, so I'm just gonna... I don't think it'll affect anything, but I'm just gonna give a quick little read over COVID. So, okay, so the good news is there's more Shody.
Yeah,
and the bad news is there's bad news.
Yeah.
Just 2 weeks after Oxford pledged to donate the rights of its COVID vaccine, making it open source, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation convinced them to instead...
Yeah, I wonder what that convincing meant.
sign an exclusive deal with AstraZeneca, one of the pharmaceutical companies the BM Foundation has invested in. This grants AstraZeneca sole rights
Do you mean BS Foundation?
to Oxford's COVID vaccine, with no promise of making the vaccine affordable. Basically, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation held millions of potential grants and funding over Oxford's head in exchange for the deal, which benefits AstraZeneca and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's investments and, not other people.
Anyone else basically harmed everyone, even the rich people.
But why would the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation promise to donate millions of dollars to make COVID vaccines more accessible, just to turn around and cut a deal with Oxford and AstraZeneca that could stand to make them billions at the expense of others? We may never know what could make someone do such a thing. But
Greed.
as KM Gopakumar, the legal advisor to the Third World Network, says, if we change the way in which you regulate the industry or the ways in which you want medicines or vaccines to be produced and delivered, it's definitely going to affect these companies' business model and also the investments of Gates Foundation. So they are using their money to reinforce the status quo.
Yeah.
Weirdly, interestingly, coincidentally, Bill Gates' wealth has increased during the pandemic by over $10 billion. Gosh, it's almost like this whole charitable foundation of his is mostly about making him money, with any actual charity being a bit of a fun little byproduct. It is weird.
Yeah. And any charity being like, yeah, we donated millions of dollars so that we could buy more of the product that we're invested in, which would probably be seen like if that was like an ordinary person, that would be seen as tax fraud or like some sort of like fraud, probably like fraudulent to investors and like that. Where it's like, yes, we sold a million units last year, to me, only to me, but still a million units all the same, you know. It's like, yeah, I sold all available units on my merch store. Just so happens that it was me, but you know, still, it still counts as all of them are bought. Yeah, so you know, all the ones that were made were sold. Yeah, that seems like fraud.
Weird. So, how's that plan of using charity to make Bill Gates and friends super wealthy and leaving a few crumbs behind for the poor? Well, it's looking kinda grim.
Well, actually, yeah, some of the crumbs were unfortunately also squashed by the billionaires. Yeah, they're kind of unusable, really.
Right now. The global vaccine rollout, especially to poorer countries, is an absolute bumble-shitting show of a butt. Studies project that at current rates, poorer countries won't see their populations vaccinated for years. In no small part due to companies like AstraZeneca, who got sole rights to that Oxford vaccine. They were going to make open source until Bill Gates said, please don't do that, please. But and golly gosh, they're now underproducing the vaccine. I'm being told because relying on a private company who is motivated by profits to save people who may not have a lot of money is actually not a super great and smart idea.
Yeah.
Maybe it should have been open source. And it's not as if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, champions of thinking, just don't realize what they're doing is a global health oopsie goofer. In October 2020, diplomats from South Africa and India came to the World Trade Organization to plead with pharmaceutical companies to waive their patents during the duration of the pandemic so that all countries could afford the vaccine. This concern is made even more clear when you find out that countries like South Africa are paying twice the amount that the EU is paying for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Why? Because the EU invested in the development of the vaccine, even though it was tested on South African study participants in Johannesburg. Weird. It's like
Also, because the EU bought the world as a whole, so it was able to say, do you want the EU deal or no deal? Same thing they did with Brexit, friends. But it is
like White Western colonialism that uses black bodies for their own profit never
is.
went away.
It is.
As if the global economic institutions that profited from slavery in the past are still finding ways to exploit people. And this is just a really obvious example of it, highlighted by a crisis.
True.
So much for making racism illegal, Abraham Lincoln. Nice try, mister. But despite the South African and Indian diplomats' humanitarian proposal, AstraZeneca refused, putting their profits over people. You see this? This is my shocked face. This is my pants-pissing look of total f***ing surprise.
Yeah, who would have known that private companies would exploit people? It's not like they do that all the fucking time.
So, pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca are hoarding patents and forcing poor countries to pay double for the vaccine.
True.
Which means we're probably looking at years before we see everyone getting access to the vaccine globally. And that's bad,
good.
because millions of people are going to get sick and die just because they were born in a not super rich country.
Also, even if you are born in a super rich country, like, how thick are you? Do you not understand how vaccines are supposed to work? Like, you get the vaccinations. When everyone, or close to everyone, is vaccinated, the virus has trouble spreading because it very quickly dies. You know? It doesn't really have much time to change, so basically, you kind of eradicate it. That's not necessarily that it won't make a comeback, but you kind of eradicate it in a way. What you've just done there is you've just basically gone, let's not do that. Let's make it so a ton of people aren't vaccinated, which means that then when someone gets COVID, they just it jumps. It'll start to switch, meaning that you're inviting the entire vaccine to collapse because you keep having people who don't have the vaccination. If people don't have the vaccination, then the vaccine can, mutate and spread to even the super rich people and super rich countries.
I'll bet that's a good enough reason to care for everyone listening to me right now, because you're a bunch of cuties with working empathy goo. But hey, let's say you're a ghoul. All right? Why should you, a ghoul, care? Well, as it turns out, allowing a virus to rampage through billions of people, even if you can't see them from your high-rise yacht, is bad. Because we're all human. No, this isn't a speech about empathy. I know. You don't have any of that.
Yeah.
This is from a biological perspective. The longer a virus has to spread through a population, the more chances it gets to mutate. And the more likely one of those mutations will turn out to make the virus deadlier, or more resistant to vaccines.
Or both.
Let me see if I can put this into terms the richies can understand. It's like if you gamble on the stock market. The more stocks, aka human bodies, you, the virus, gets to own, the more likely you're going to become stronger. And some of your gambling is going to pay off.
Yeah.
This isn't just a fun biological thought exercise. It's literally happening right now. You may have heard of the COVID variants from the UK that are spreading more easily. But there's also a COVID variant found in South Africa and now in the US that may be both more transmissible and less responsive to vaccines. South Africa, that sounds familiar. Oh! We talked about it 10 seconds ago, about the South African diplomat who asked pharmaceutical companies to make the vaccine accessible to their country to help them inoculate people, which would probably maybe have stopped this new strain from developing.
Yeah, and then it wouldn't have gone on to kill millions of people.
Don't worry, though. I'm sure if this strain starts to wreak havoc on the rest of the world, we'll find a way to blame South Africa in a super racist and xenophobic way. Yay? Sorry, I have this thing where when I reach a certain level of despair, I say, yay. Don't worry, it's just the sound of my brain getting fried by sadness and rage.
Well, I think it's probably been solved, though, by now, because, doesn't say it as much, so, so clearly the yay thing has been solved, because, the depression hasn't, anyway.
Yay! So, if we allow the virus to spread and destroy lives in poorer countries, it's going to come back to bite us in the ass, not just morally or karmically, but biologically. As the chances of creating a deadlier, stronger, and more resistant virus becomes way more likely, which
Is not
let me
good.
check with my science expert. Dr. Katie Stoll, a doctor, from a medical perspective, is people dying bad?
Well, Cody, if you look at this science chart, here is an alive person, figure A, and here is a dead person, figure B.
it's not
Now, if you examine the data using a mathematical model to take the square root of the formula of being alive, you will conclude that being dead is in fact bad.
Yeah.
BBC QED.
Well,
Don't worry.
there you have it, folks.
I
Which is
actually-
weird because it's almost like the rich ruling class
Don't
would
worry,
prefer
by
a
the way.
bunch of people to die over helping them.
It's okay.
Almost
as
like
well, just in case you're wondering if that was inaccurate, I've also conducted a little study myself, and it turns out yes, it's like a kind of a peer review in a way. So yeah, basically it is correct. Being dead tends to be worse for the rest of the population. For yourself, the dead person, that's a different story sometimes. But for other people, it's not great. So sometimes it's not. Maybe you should avoid it just in case, because, well, yeah.
they're more afraid of losing some of their total power than they are of human extinction. That may seem like an exaggeration.
I would say you need to be very careful because, like, inherently, humans are what runs capitalism. It means that it can be successful. So if you are someone who's like, oh yeah, we should, like, but don't you realize that you're hard on yourself, surely, aren't you? You know.
But let's look at some research.
Oh, Cody, do you need another chart?
No, it's...
Remember, QED.
Yes, right. QUED. So, studies back in May of 2020 found that over 36,000 lives in the US could have been saved if lockdown measures had started even just a week earlier.
Yeah.
Another analysis shows that if the US had done a serious lockdown early on, like South Korea, Australia, Germany, and Singapore, between 70 and 99% of Americans who died from COVID may have been saved.
Yeah.
It's easy enough to draw the conclusion that the lack of lockdowns in the US was a mere calculation of the economy over human lives.
Yeah.
But even that doesn't quite make sense. An analysis by the World Bank found that earlier lockdowns not only saved lives, but had less negative impacts on the economy. Countries like South Korea that contained
That does depend on who gets impacted. If you have this idea of no lockdowns at all, of like, you are sick, you work, you work. I do not care how sick you are, you will work all of your life, whether you're sick or not. Then obviously, if someone gets the virus and they're not like dying or in terrible illness from it, then obviously, you can work them to the bone still. But the problem, you see, is that when you say, oh, we won't have any lockdowns, we will lock you down if you get sick, resulting in this sort of weird position in which you basically let it spread, but then once it's spread, then quarantine people, which makes no sense. Which you're going to choose? Lockdowns or no lockdowns? Because telling people to take personal lockdowns is basically the exact same thing as telling everyone to do a lockdown. The point is basically that because most people were elderly, it meant that a lot of people would have argued that it would actually benefit the economy if they just let it rip completely, because that would have meant you didn't have to pay out pensions. The problem, of course, is that would also benefit many pension funds, who are all owned most of the time by rich companies and rich people. So yeah.
the virus by successfully locking down and paying people to stay home seemed to get less wrecked, economically speaking. South Korea's GDP shrank by only 1.1% compared to the US's 9%. So countries
other
who
countries,
locked down early and got people to stay home are doing better both in the whole keeping people alive thing.
Although I think your global economy isn't necessarily a good characteristic of what your economy is doing as a whole, realistically at a worldly level, when it comes to trading worldly or trading internally, are two different things.
And economically. This just in, ear thing, killing a bunch of people and having the constant threat of a deadly unabated virus may actually not be so great for the economy. So in the US, either we have a bunch of foolish billionaires, a distinct possibility, or there's something that billionaires fear more than a pandemic. After all, so far the pandemic hasn't hurt them too bad. In fact,
Yeah. Not great. Also, what was that again? Like in the UK, the government basically handed billionaires money. They printed it and just gave it to billionaires. You're just like, why? I know some people are against mean testing, but like, why would you give mega rich people all of that money? Like, why?
fact, many billionaires are doing quite well.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos has added a cool $35 billion to his wealth. Mark Zuckerberg with a measly $25 billion.
Well, he lost a significant amount of that recently enough.
And like I said earlier, Bill Gates, philanthropist, got $10 billion.
Crazy.
So the pandemic's not really...
And and this is my point, but people never address this when they talk about this, which is like, if a billionaire gets 10 billion, unless they're selling like extreme luxury goods, and I'm talking like extreme, like we're talking mega yachts, mega planes, rockets, all these things they're selling to people, and not like selling to businesses who then rent them out. I mean, like directly selling to people for those people's personal pleasure, or use. The point is, in that scenario, what you're doing there is that unless you're doing that, then they're hurting you. They're hurting the general population, because if billionaires get 434 billion quid, or in this case dollars. Just American billionaires, by the way. Just American billionaires, not global billionaires. Then that's more money out of your pocket. It's more money out of everyone's pocket globally, because most American billionaires get money from global businesses. So so basically, that's you have less money then. That's how that works. So people have this idea of like, oh, it's bad billionaires have this much money because it means they're profiting off of people's misery. They misunderstand. Like, if billionaires are making money on this level, it means you're losing it. Because this isn't American billionaires got 434 billion, but then spent 434 billion and 1 million. The actual net worth went down. This is, they got this much flat. That's how much they have now. That's how much is increased by. Not how much came in as a whole. This is just, what they have.
Hurting the wealthiest in their pockets. But you'd think the prospect of breeding an unstoppable super virus by letting it munch away at the pores would be scary. But there's something even scarier. The pores. Specifically, the poors realizing they can and should demand more from their governments. After all, if the government can pay people a living wage to stay home, what's next? Paying people health care? Free education? Food security? Where does it end? Asks ghouls like GOP Senator Lindsey Graham,
Horrible fella.
who took a stand against $600 unemployment checks back in April 2020. Quote, I promise you, over our dead bodies, will this get reauthorized?
Not your dead body, but actually maybe it is. Let's breed COVID into him and kill a fecker.
He said. Dead bodies, huh? Cool choice of words during a deadly pandemic. Real obvious dramatic irony. Very, very Sorkin-esque, Lindsay. But then he gives the game away. Graham said, quote, "It was never our goal to pay people more to be out of work than at work. If a person is making $23 an hour on unemployment, it's going to be hard to get you to go back to work for $17 an hour job."
Yeah. Or even, a 23 hour job, to be honest. Because unless you enjoy your job, why would you go back to it? Why would you? It's miserable. It's depressing. You want to kill yourself, oftentimes. This is the point. A lot of people have misery in their lives. And it's just a consistent thing all of the time. Now, you can act on that. But ultimately, unless you act as a group, you're probably going to get arrested, Like, let's say you assassinate some politicians that are holding up stuff. That's not really going to do anything, for one, because you need to replace those politicians. In actual fact, those politicians are going to replace people who are exactly the same, So you need a mass movement. If you don't have that mass movement, what's the point of rising up is always the issue. This was the issue under Nazism. You had people who were against the Nazis, but never spoke because they knew if they spoke up against it, if they did anything to upset the Nazis, what would happen? Well, concentration camp for them. And this is the point. Inherently, this is always the problem of having a society in which you are taken advantage of, but you just can't do anything about it, So, inherently, yeah, life is depressing, but we can solve those problems. We just need to act together. But of course, at the end of the day, that still doesn't change the fact that, we could get good jobs. But thanks to Lindsay, we won't.
That right there, that's what they're afraid of. People suddenly feeling what it's like to be valued.
True.
Suddenly being given a scrap of dignity and realizing that maybe they should demand that little piece of dignity when companies beg them to come back to work.
Yeah.
If you want to know what scares a rich ghoul, it's this, right here. A poster on the unemployment subreddit titled, "For 4 months I felt normal."
Yeah.
This person wrote, "For the 4 months that the $600 was in place, I got to feel normal for the first time in my entire life. For once, I could afford all my bills and have a little left over to enjoy. My entire adult life, I worked jobs that paid just over the minimum wage. I worked hard and never got ahead financially. I even felt the government was doing..."
To be honest, at the end of the day, hardly even matters if you work hard or not when it comes to a lot of these jobs. It's just like, you work hard, you don't work hard, you get paid fuck all. Either way.
doing right by me for the first time. I don't know if we'll ever see that again, but it was nice while it lasted. It's sad that the majority is left out and that it took a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic to be able to feel what it is like to make a fair amount of money. I still maintain that the problem wasn't the $600, it was the fact that so many jobs pay so poorly.
Yeah.
That scares the shit out of the Lindsey Grahams and Bill Gateses of the world.
True.
That is what they fear far more than a pandemic growing out of control. Someone getting just a tiny glimmer of comfort and normalcy and wondering why they don't deserve this the rest of the time. Why can't they keep that little $600, which makes such a huge difference to them, while Jeff Bezos makes $35 billion extra during a pandemic?
Yeah.
That's probably part of the reason the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was so threatened by Oxford making their COVID vaccine open source. Because if they did that, people might start to wonder why other vaccines shouldn't be open source.
Yeah.
If it saves so many lives at so low a cost, why don't we do it with other vaccines? Why do we beg and plead for...
Why are all these products, why do they have, patents on them when, they're making perfectly good money on their own? It's like, yeah.
Or scraps from generous billionaires like Bill Gates when we could make global healthcare a reality ourselves. It might mean we question why COVID vaccines, developed using public funds and government-funded research, are being sold by private companies globally at a profit. So the pharmaceutical companies get government subsidies, and the rest of the world gets rugged free market capitalism.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's as if socialism is good, and maybe there's a reason private companies are...
This is my point, though. In America, you basically, in some cases, have like socialism, but it's just like socialism, but then just before we get to the individual, we add in private companies as the middleman. What the fuck? So, the government collects your money in the form of taxes, does all the paperwork, gets the product made, and then just gives the fucking money to private companies? What is the point of that? You know? What is the point of all of that? You know? At the end of the day, you have to ask that, don't you? Like, all the work, but none of the play.
Hoarding it for themselves. The thing is, people realizing their worth, their collective power, and the positive impacts of sharing wealth is scarier than a super mutant COVID virus to them. And that's... I'm not sure how to put it into words.
Haha, I knew you'd need more charts.
You were so right!
As you can see, illustrated by this diagram.
That's a penis.
Yes, a
What?
science penis.
Very educational. Thank you, Katie. Maybe it's break time. So, here's some news. A commercial. Are you in the free market for sound? Sound in your ears? My ears? Well,
Oh, it's Raycon. Okay, I don't think celebrities are any good of a judge because they're filled with corruption. And never, ever, ever listen to a YouTuber. I have to say that. Just like never listen.
after 6 hours.
Sometimes they're good,
Hi, welcome
but most of them are evil.
monsters. Hi, welcome back. Oh, hello. So, the super wealthy monsters who get to hoard vaccines and money would rather see the ship go down than risk giving people a taste of economic freedom. And this death culty response to the pandemic happens to highlight other cracks in our society. While we may see the capitalistic death cult more clearly during a pandemic, it's always been there.
Yeah.
And we can see evidence of that in some of the communities where the pandemic has hit the hardest. Earlier, we talked about how AstraZeneca used South African bodies to test the vaccine and then denied them access to the patent and charged them double for the vaccine.
Yeah.
It's a pretty
How did you make that? You know.
perfect demonstration of how Western colonialism still exploits other countries with callous regard to their lives. But hey, I don't even have to leave the comfort of my own country to see this happening.
Yeah.
Yes, even though Abraham Lincoln made racism illegal in 1862,
Racism.
and then LBJ made racism double illegal in 1964, weirdly, racism seems to still exist. And not just the on-the-nose Proud Boys marching around with their loser Confederate flag,
Yeah.
cosplaying in their desert camo and urban...
Also, I have to say, Confederate, like, you do know you are Nazis, right? You were aware of that. You are the bad guys in. Even the British can look at you and go, yeah, those are the bad guys, you know? Like, if the British government and the British people can look at you and think you're the bad guys, yeah, you're fucking bad. Because, well, not obviously just because they say you're bad, then that might even make you good. But, you know, if they can realize it, that's a bad sign. Because it takes the British government a whole lot and the British people a whole lot to realize that.
environment's way. See, the pandemic is hitting black and brown communities hardest, which seems weird because the coronavirus itself can't be racist. Unless... An improvement, honestly. Anyway, research into the impact of COVID has shown that black communities die from the virus at 2 to 3 times the rate as one would expect based on their share of the population.
Yeah.
Latinx communities also see a disproportionate number of COVID cases compared to their population,
Yeah.
up to 4 times than they should experience.
bad.
Native communities in the US, including in Alaska, are seeing
Very
COVID
bad.
cases at 3.5 times that of non-Hispanic whites.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what that would be. It might be the same thing as drugs, just happens to be the case. Definitely no intentional fuckery.
White communities, meanwhile, see fewer deaths than one would expect given our share of the population. And I know this is getting some Nazis hard as a rock right now, reaching for their calipers to tweeze their dicks and claim that for some reason, coronavirus just happens to spare white people more because our buttholes are the perfect Aryan shape or whatever. But to actual scientists,
Yeah,
this is a very wrong explanation. As epidemiologist and director of public policy at AMFAR, Greg Millett says, there's a structural issue.
I mean, inherently, I think it's a problem of people not understanding science and scientific studies in general. YouTubers have a terrible I saw this YouTuber before, and they were calling this YouTuber smart and intelligent and all that stuff because one of their videos they made. And they're like, that video ignores basic scientific study principles. Basic stuff. They're not smart for coming to a conclusion when it's based off faulty logic. It's yeah, was that an accurate study? Yes, that would be great, but it's not an accurate study. So unfortunately, it doesn't matter that you got the answer that you should have gotten if that study was accurate, because the study wasn't accurate. So if you're gonna be a fucking Nazi, understand you might want to improve your science, because the Nazis didn't have the best science when it came to their schools. Didn't have the best ones there. So just saying, let's be careful.
That's taking place here. It's not a genetic issue for all non-white individuals in the US. So put away your butthole calipers, Nazis. The epidemiologist didn't say that last part. That was me, the butthole caliper thing, just to clarify. So it's not a coincidence that the communities that have endured some of the most long-term oppression, genocide, and exploitation in the US are being hit hardest by the pandemic. Another person who knows stuff, Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith, director of the Equity Research and Innovation Center at Yale School of Medicine, says, we know that these racial ethnic disparities in COVID-19 are the result of pre-pandemic realities.
Yeah.
It's a legacy of structural discrimination that has limited access to health and wealth for people of color. The structural lack of access to healthcare in black and brown communities means that people with preventable disease like diabetes, heart, and lung disease struggle to get treatment. And having these diseases makes COVID infections more dangerous and deadly. Also, people of color are more likely to have frontline and essential jobs. The jobs we applaud and cheer for until it actually comes to raising their wages or improving their working conditions. This is something to consider when people talk about the impact of racism in this country. It's not just Confederate flag-waving weirdos or when PragerU defends slavery, although those things are both extremely bad. It's also found in the systemic structural inequalities in our institutions like healthcare, which has always existed.
I think PragerU is fucking weird,
but is especially noticeable when a pandemic reveals horrifying statistics, like how black counties that make up 30% of the US population are the location of 56% of COVID deaths.
Not
it's
great.
Interesting too, and when I say interesting, I'm about to say something horrible, but it's interesting how getting the country back to work and businesses are suffering always seems to be framed as a middle America white dude issue.
You always do wonder at times the way that, when things slow down, you're like, okay, so the farms are running, so why do we need all of this stuff? What's with all the need for all this stuff? And sure. Well, people never learn, do they?
Anti-lockdown protests seem to draw in the white supremacist crowds, who capitalize on the lockdowns as a way to say that white people are being oppressed by using fun slogans like Arbeit macht frei, JB, which is German for work sets you free. It's a
Christ.
slogan. It was featured at the entrance of the Auschwitz Nazi death camp.
Wow. 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 Wow.
JB refers to the Jewish governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. Now, I'm no branding expert, but I think rooting your anti-lockdown argument in the slogan of a literal death camp where people were worked to death and died of disease in large numbers is maybe a swing and a miss.
Not really a great policy. It's like, yeah, you know, you should be like all those people who worked very hard and were freed in the sense that they died and didn't have to work anymore. Yay. How wonderful. How about we start punishing Nazism with more, prison sentences and something like that? Because I think this person, like that person, kind of would deserve a little bit of a, maybe nothing drastic, but like maybe small prison sentence. Who knows?
But the big thinkers over at Proud Boy University may need to check their math, because according to data from this past December, the people most likely to lose their jobs due to the pandemic are women of color.
Yeah.
That's not to say that there aren't many white people who have lost their jobs or are suffering economically due to the pandemic.
Well, yeah, obviously, but, still, when you get down to it, and ask the actual questions, you have to go, well, yeah, it is going to be the people who are discriminated against, which is generally women of color and people who are in this position. It's like,
but it does kind of poke a hole in the old white supremacist brown people are they're taking our jobs and they're stealing our freedoms theory. Of course, racism isn't the only piss stain that the
also, it's very weird to have this idea of like taking your jobs when you're in the same moment as you have like automation. It's like, yeah, those people, yeah, maybe it's people who are like racist towards like immigrants and migrants. You're like, oh yeah, because they're taking your job. Really? Oh, are they? Funny, because it looks more like you can't be fucking bothered to do that job because you couldn't survive on the pay. So maybe, don't complain. If you're concerned, then petition the government to increase the minimum wage to 20 quid.
Pandemic is shining a light on. Legal advocates and civil rights groups have reported that hospitals have been denying life-saving care to people with physical and mental disabilities. In March 2020, a woman with a mental disability was given a DNR, do not resuscitate order, without her consent by hospital staff in Oregon. Staff of that same hospital also requested that the woman's group home fill out DNR forms for the rest of their mentally disabled residents prior to that.
That is that is murder. That is just plainly murder. Let's be honest here. That's just straight up murder.
Them coming to the hospital. Despite this, the hospital was not sanctioned by the Oregon Health Authority. There are apparently shockingly few safeguards in place to protect the medical rights of people with cognitive disabilities. In another alarming, sort of eugenics-ish move, pandemic disaster preparedness plans for certain states openly threaten to withhold treatment for people with mental disabilities. A ProPublica report found that Alabama's pandemic plan detailed that, quote, persons with severe mental retardation, advanced dementia, or severe traumatic brain injury may be poor candidates for ventilator support. Other states are less openly discriminating, but have no protections in place if a doctor decides that in triage, people with cognitive disabilities should be given less priority. Especially concerning, given that the American Bar Association's Commission on Disability Rights has found a negative bias against people with disabilities amongst healthcare providers. The report states, quote,
That's not great, is it? Like,
Studies have consistently demonstrated that healthcare providers hold negative views of people with disabilities and fail to fully appreciate the value and quality of life with
yeah, that's eugenics. You need to like definitely remove doctors and nurses who do that.
a disability. I believe the Nazis referred to such people as useless eaters. But anyway, this is not me, Cody, saying, I hate doctors, I hate nurses and healthcare workers, they're all bad people, Nazis even. Obviously, most people who enter into the medical field are deeply caring, as we can see by the sacrifices healthcare workers are making right now. But when biases exist in general society, like
I mean, in fairness, I think some people, it becomes a problem because you see, countries have this issue of basically creating a system where they're like, okay, so we want to ensure that only the highest skilled people are able to enter this job market. So, well, what do we do? Well, we'll ensure that, you can only enter with a certain ability. Problem with that, of course, is that means that only certain people can enter, causing the promise of like, oh yeah, you need to be very smart to do this thing to rise, meaning that more and more people do it because, well, it's the one with the highest requirements or something like that. Like in my country, medicine is a really high requirement, so to do that, people do medicine sometimes, and they sometimes they drop out afterwards. I have an uncle who, studied as a nurse. It's a problem, because sometimes people will leave because they realize, well, just because it's, the most, it doesn't mean that you should necessarily do it,
Every player has that one thing they need to
That's
compete at the highest level.
I really want to skip ads. Okay, so there's. Okay.
like biases against the mentally disabled or racism. They're obviously going to infiltrate the medical community because we all live in a society, bottom text. Even the medical community is not immune to the prejudices that exist in our culture. The pandemic is just a dramatic example of what those biases lead to. Differential treatment, which can literally be fatal. Perhaps nothing is more demonstrative of how social hierarchy leads to death than how we treat the unhoused during a pandemic. Right now,
that was it's evil,
shelters aren't a great place to be because, the virus thing, germ theory, people indoors, you get it. At the same time, hotels and other buildings are being vastly underused because of the pandemic. So,
true.
What if we took all this extra building space and we gave it to homeless people to live in? Well, hey, would you look at that? The Austin City Council is voting on that right now, using funds taken from.
Interestingly, that was what people did for Ukrainian refugees. Not in the best way, because they did well. They went to their mates and said, "Hey, you own a hotel then? Yeah. So hey, what would I say to you? We'll give you a government contract. We'll pay you a bunch of money, and then you'll take our Ukrainian refugees." So basically, they were giving money to their mates. But in my country, they said to all the hotels, during like the lower months, oh, we'll give you more money than you would get from guests for Ukrainian refugees. So that would mean you can have more Ukrainian refugees. Problem, of course, was when we came to the summertime, then they were like, well, we actually don't really want you anymore because now we can make more money out of these people. So, but they still took the money though from the government. So not always great. Sometimes it's mismanaged. It's like mismanaged. It's not mismanagement. It's corruption. So this does lead to corruption at times. But my argument against that would be just like, don't have corrupt politicians. You voted for them, Although you can always argue, technically, you voted for them from a choice. So, most politicians are corrupt in some shape or form.
Excessive police budgets to buy empty hotels to house the unhoused. Look, we could do
No.
that, or we could continue homeless camp sweeps where SWAT, state troopers, and ICE, armed to the
Wow.
teeth, show up to kick people out of their shelters, destroy their belongings,
That's super, super evil.
and I guess try to deport them. Something which is not only cruel, but also goes against CDC guidance on COVID safety,
Yeah, like,
which advises that kicking people out of their shelters and forcing them to
Jesus Christ.
constantly move around is actually bad during a pandemic. Now, I'm no Dr. Science, but that kind of makes sense, huh? So, my friends, my cutie patooties, I'm not telling you all this to bum you out. Yes, a lot of this stuff is, as the kids say, a real bummer. But I
Well,
think this
in
last example of
fairness-
how we treat unhoused
In fairness, there's also, in a sense, how life works. So, it's factual. It's how human beings decide to run things. Mighty.
people really does exemplify the way in which empathy and kindness is actually the logical, science-backed move. Providing everyone with a vaccine, regardless of whether their country has the most money, fighting against racial and disability discrimination in our healthcare system, providing our most vulnerable neighbors with housing. These are not only the kind things to do, but they're doable, and they actually make everyone safer, healthier, and better off. Cruelty, though, only providing vaccines to the highest bidder, allowing prejudice to taint our healthcare system, and treating unhoused human beings like vermin, is not just cruel, but threatens everyone.
True.
It makes things worse. It's perhaps more tangible when we're talking about a viral disease that is mutating into a worse viral disease, but there's so many other issues like climate change or general quality of life where it still holds true that protecting vulnerable communities trickles up and helps protect all of us. And there are lots of people who recognize this, from the diplomats who saw the importance of making the vaccine attainable for every country in the
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, inherently, is that at the end of the day, looking at it, you're like, well, this is how, like, people can understand it, but at the end of the day, racist people oftentimes, the ones that have power are able to understand that they're being racist, but they see profit off of it, because, sure, Bill Gates will probably, he knows he fucked it up, he killed millions of people, he is a mass murderer. But while Bill Gates is a mass murderer, legal reasons I'm not calling him a mass murderer, I'm just saying he basically is, he's still in effect better off for him because, of course, money, and as long as he keeps himself nice and safe, then, well, it's fine. And this is sort of the point. Like, inherently, if you've got a system in which the rich are able to have this, it's like, well, yes, people become mass murderers. This is why politicians, will like talk about, politicians. They try to avoid the fact that politicians inevitably will kill someone, indirectly or directly. Mostly indirectly. And this is sort of the point. It's like, how many people did Bill Gates basically murder? Once again, for legal reasons, I'm not going to say actually murder them. I'm just saying, I'm just saying.
The world to the houseless advocates in Austin, Texas, getting the city council to vote on giving them housing. People who see how important empathy is to our survival are out there, working hard to advocate for people who need it the most.
Cody, I just ran the numbers.
What numbers? I was really getting sincere there, Katie. These better be important numbers.
These numbers, Cody's these. I ran all of them, and I found it. This is it. This is the answer.
What? The answer to... Just tell me what you want to say.
Ha ha!
God, I see.
What?
Well, wait, there's more. Huh?
Oh, that's so nice.
God almighty.
Okay, I think we're done here.
God almighty, no. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think inherently when it comes to global health,
Thank you for the true science.
we really need to, not have
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment that's nice or mean. It's up to you. But the important thing is that you like and subscribe. We've got a patreon.com/some more news. Even more news is the name of the podcast. And t-shirts as well is a link that you could find in the description. Like, subscribe.
That's good. Well, I am actually already subscribed, but you can go ahead and you can subscribe and all that sort of stuff.
It's the year of free fuel at Top Oil. Each month there's a chance.
Okay. Whatever. Anyway, so yeah, but yeah, I would like the video. Hopefully you liked the video too, and hopefully, you can see all the links to Some More News in the description. Hopefully I'll see you next time. I guess. Yeah. Thank you for watching. Bye.